one.
Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with MS experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS Navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. I've always said that multiple sclerosis doesn't only affect the individual who's been diagnosed, it can affect the entire family. Children in particular may have a hard time understanding what it means when a parent has MS and observing the challenges that parent may experience. Joining us today to share some tips and insights on how parents can speak to their children about MS is Erin Martin. Erin is a licensed social worker and director of engagement and programming at With All. Erin is also a youth camp counselor and behavioral specialist, and she recently launched Caregiver Collaborative, an organization that supports non-traditional and underrepresented caregivers with a focus on young people. Welcome, Erin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, whether we grown-ups like to acknowledge it or not, children see everything. And when they don't have any information to explain the changes they see and sense going on around them, well, children use their imaginations to fill in the blanks, and very often the things they imagine are far worse than the actual reality. So let's start at the very beginning. Why is it important for parents to talk to their children about their MS?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, when we're talking to kids and we don't share a lot of information with them, they're really likely to kind of make up a story about what's going on. And so when we provide kids really accurate and age-appropriate information about MS, it can really help clear up confusion and be really reassuring to them. This is particularly true for young kids. They tend to see the things that are happening around them and they connect it to their own lives. So they might actually start to believe that the things that are happening are something that they caused. So they might think, oh my gosh, did I cause my parents to have MS, or did I cause these symptoms to happen? But when we provide them that accurate information, we can more easily reassure them that they didn't cause their parent to have MS. We can help alleviate those feelings of guilt, confusion, and shame. And I know that this sometimes can be really intimidating for adults to figure out how to talk to their kids about MS, but it's really so important to start those conversations early and to have those conversations often as they grow older. And with a little more practice we'll gain that kind of comfort and confidence in talking with kids and know that we'll feel really good knowing that they're informed and comfortable talking to you about a parent's MS.
Well, all of that begs the next question. Tell me, what's a good way to explain MS to a child?
Yeah, there's a lot of really great resources out there that can really help adults who are trying to figure out how to talk to their kid about MS through the MS Society. But one that my family used pretty frequently when I was younger, my dad has multiple sclerosis and he was diagnosed when I was quite young. And so he would often talk to my sister and I about the analogy with an electrical cord. So if we think about that electrical cord and the coating that goes over the electrical cord being like the myelin sheath over our nerves, that really helps make sure that signal gets from the outlet to our computers, our tablets, our video games, whatever it is that we're using. And with MS, sometimes that coating gets damaged. And so we can really help kids visualize that. You might even take an old cord and kind of show them what that might look like. And when it gets compromised, it makes it so that those signals are not always consistent. So sometimes it might stop working altogether. Sometimes we might get part of a signal and the picture gets blurry or the sound starts to sound weird. And so really finding ways to explain to young people in terms that they can understand and using things that they already kind of understand the concepts behind can really make it easier for them. But just keeping in mind, whatever information we do provide to them should always be kind of accurate information, and we can always follow their lead. So starting with those really simple concepts, and as they ask more questions, as they get older or more curious, we can kind of provide some more information to them in that way.
When kids participate in family support groups or attend an MS camp, they all have at least one common question. How do people get MS? And what they're really asking is whether MS is inherited, because they're already wondering if they'll get MS too.
Yeah,
what's the best way to handle? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, as a youth camp volunteer and behavior specialist, I hear this question a lot, and it's one that I asked myself quite a bit as a young person as well. And so I think it is really, really important to emphasize with kids that while we don't know exactly what causes with MS, we know that it can't be inherited and that we can't catch it like we can catch, a cold or the flu. And so really reassuring them that it's not something that they need to be kind of super worried about. And as they get older, I think we can also continue to reassure them, while we aren't really sure what causes MS, there's a lot of really great treatments out there, and that scientists are working really hard and getting closer to understanding more and more about MS and getting closer to finding a cure for it every day. And so we can kind of help kids feel reassured in that way as well.
Trying to describe MS symptoms to an adult can be challenging. I imagine it's not any easier for a child. You have some symptoms that may be visible. You have symptoms that we know can be invisible, and you have symptoms that change over time. So what are some ways parents can help their children understand MS symptoms?
Yeah, this is a common question. And I think especially like you mentioned, kind of those invisible symptoms can be particularly tough for us to help kids understand. There are some really great resources out there, but I recommend kind of keeping things simple and describing those feelings the best you can and relating them to things that they might have experienced before. So when you're talking about numbness and tingling, you might be talking about, what happens when your arm falls asleep. That's a little bit what it feels like to have that numbness and tingling, but it kind of lasts all the time. And you can also try doing some different activities. So when I was a young person at youth camp, one of the things we would do is sort of a relay race where you would experience some different symptoms. So putting on glasses or goggles that had soap or something kind of on the lenses to kind of help show you what that vision blurriness might look like, or wearing gloves to try and pick things up as opposed to having your fingers pick them up normally. So really helping kids kind of demonstrate that and having those conversations. And then I think equally as important in that conversation is really helping kids understand what steps you as an adult can take to really help alleviate some of those symptoms or make life easier. So talking about that adaptive equipment and some of those things so kids don't worry so much about kind of what challenges that might present for their parent.
We heard from Tammy, who's living with MS, and Tammy's wondering how much she should tell her children about her MS.
Yeah, so I think really providing that basic information first, and then following kids' leads. So I think anytime we're trying to figure out how much information to give to a kid, we start with that really basic information. As they ask questions, we can continue to kind of provide them a little bit more information along the way. And that information that you start with will really depend on age and maturity level of your child. But I think most importantly, always remember it should be accurate information. Don't lie, don't make up information, don't provide so much information that it gets overwhelming and scary for them. And so really kind of finding that sweet spot for kids. And I think oftentimes we know when kids kind of their curiosity has been satisfied and they feel like they got the information that they needed.
Sometimes Michael's mom seems fine. Other times she struggles. So how can parents explain to children why their MS symptoms can come and go?
Yeah, I think explaining the idea of relapses or exacerbations to kids can be kind of an overwhelming topic, but something that kids really can understand. And I think if we go back to that example of the electrical cord, you might kind of be able to use that again. So sometimes we might make temporary fixes on those cords. We might be able to kind of repair things for a short time. We might be able to jiggle the cord around a little bit and it seems to work okay for a while. But then eventually, another part of the cord gets frayed or that temporary fix stops working. And so that signal can get interrupted again. And so That's one way you can do it. I think also sharing with kids a little bit about, sometimes when we're fatigued or we're in certain situations like extreme heat, we might have symptoms that start to feel worse, but when we're well rested, when we've taken time to give our body the things that it needs, we might find that some of our symptoms feel better. And so really explaining some of that nuance to kids, and particularly in your own situation, what that kind of looks like for you, will help alleviate some of that concern for young people.
Some children can be quite fearful and even wonder if a parent will die from MS. How can parents approach this conversation and provide some reassurance to their children?
Yeah, I know I hear this often, and I know as from a lot of parents, this is really heartbreaking when they hear their kids ask this question. But that's why I think it is really important to emphasize for kids early that MS is not a fatal diagnosis. And I know sometimes there can be some confusion about this. I know something I heard as a young person from other people who I knew who had parents with MS was they knew someone who did pass away from MS, but really clearing up that confusion for them, helping them understand that that's not the case. And if kids continue to ask questions, I think it's okay to help them understand that, sometimes certain symptoms can put us at more risk for things like taking serious falls or increased risk of infection. And that's why it's important that we take steps to mitigate those risks and really help protect adults from those things so that we're not putting ourselves at risk. And that's oftentimes when people say that they know someone who passed away from MS, they're often talking about those kind of complications that came from those symptoms, and kind of distinguishing between those two things for kids so that they can get really clear on what is and isn't happening in there.
It's hard for a child to see a parent struggle, and it's natural for them to want to see mom or dad get better. What's the answer when they ask if there's a cure for MS or if there's anything out there that can make mom or dad feel better?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do know that there is no cure for MS right now, but I think the exciting news, and something I'm really excited to talk about because it certainly was not nearly as exciting of a conversation when I was a kid, is that there's a lot of awesome advances being made every single day in terms of treatment that we can provide folks living with MS, different medications and different lifestyle things that we can be doing to really help improve symptoms and experience. And I think too, just the number of advances that have been made towards really understanding MS and getting closer and closer to a cure every day is really, really exciting stuff that I think I always get really excited to talk to young people about and share with them. And I think it gives us some hope and some opportunity to stay engaged in kind of helping the MS Society make movement in that way.
We heard from Beth, whose husband has MS, and his gait is visibly impaired. Beth is upset to see how embarrassed her son gets when he's out with his father. What advice do you have for Beth?
Oh boy, I get it. I think it can be really tough for kids to feel different from other kids. And feeling embarrassed by parent symptoms is really, really common, and something I know I certainly went through as a kid. As a parent, I think it's really important to open the door and have this conversation with your child early. Let them know that you understand that it's really tough and it can be hard to be different and to see your parent struggle in this way. But letting them know, hey, it kind of bums me out that you feel embarrassed by this, and I want to have a conversation with you, and invite them to talk about their own feelings, provide that information to them. And I think too, it's also an opportunity to discuss with your kids, hey, if you see your father struggling out at different events, is there a way that you can find some friends who you can talk to about this? And can we use this as an opportunity to explain what MS is to our friends and our family members, and might kind of help get them feeling more comfortable, less fearful, less embarrassed. And it is a really great way to start building some of that resilience and that support network that's really important for kids with parents with chronic illness.
We heard from Mark, whose wife has MS, and Mark's afraid that he'll break down and start to cry when he's talking to his daughter about what's going on with her mom. How can Mark best navigate that conversation?
Yeah, this is super common and really normal. And I think there's a couple of things that I want to address in this. As a parent, navigating talking to your kid about MS might start with needing some time to really process that yourself. And so whatever that looks like for you, perhaps it's talking to your loved ones, maybe it's joining a support group, going to therapy, whatever that looks like for you. And once you've had some time to kind of process that diagnosis yourself, I think it will help you to feel more confident, more equipped to address it with your kids. And then when you do decide that it's time to talk to your kids, I think a couple of important things to keep in mind. The first is maybe consider timing. So make sure everyone's, well rested, well fed, like things are really feeling good. Everyone's kind of in a good space to be having that conversation. And then I think when you do have it, if you do start to cry, I think that that's okay. Crying is healthy. It's normal. It's a natural part of life. But I think making sure that kids know when those big feelings do come up, we can say things to them like, hey, even adults, sometimes I'm feeling a lot of big emotions. I don't know what's going to happen. And that can be really scary, but I want you to know that whatever feelings you're having are also really okay. And if you want to come to me to have that conversation, if you have questions, if you have concerns, or you want to just feel your feelings about this, that's okay. And so really opening that conversation, inviting them to share those feelings is going to go a long way, even if you do have an emotional moment in that conversation.
We know that not everyone discloses their MS. So what if an MS diagnosis hasn't been disclosed outside the family? How do parents tell their children to keep the secret?
Yeah, I think each family, really will need to address this in their own way. There's a lot of factors that need to be considered, and certainly don't want to push anyone to share this information before they're ready. But having kids keep secrets can feel really hard for kids to hold on to. It can make it feel really shameful. It can make things feel bad. It can be really tough for kids. So I think instead we like to talk to kids about privacy and helping them understand that concept of privacy. So you might give an example of a time, your kid was doing something that they would prefer that not all of their classmates knew. Maybe they wet the bed, maybe they fell, maybe they did something embarrassing, right? And so helping them understand in those moments, we would want to keep those things private in our family. And that's the same thing here. And letting them know who it is they can talk to about MS. I think it's important that they do feel like there's some people that they can have these conversations with, and who are some folks that maybe we're not ready to tell, and then maybe share a little bit of information about why will really help kids to kind of delineate that. And then also, I think important knowing that if they do accidentally share that information with someone, then we're not going to get mad at them. That we might have to have a conversation about, again, what does privacy mean, and when do we need to keep these things within our family? But we're not mad at them, or we're not upset. It's just a preference that we have.
We heard from Darren, who says his son feels angry and disappointed that Darren, his dad, doesn't come to his baseball games or play catch with him. His dad can't do the things that he sees his friends' dads do. What advice can you offer to Darren?
Yeah, I think I totally understand this one. Certainly something I dealt with. I think it's really hard for kids when they see other people's parents showing up to those games or playing catch with them in the yard, things like that. And so I would really encourage Darren to reach out and talk to his dad about this and say, hey, I'm really bummed that we can't do these things together. Ask questions and then come up with a plan together. I think the really great thing about it's 2022 is that there's a lot of other options that we might be able to implement. So you might be able to have another parent who might be able to live stream those games. It's not exactly the same, but at least Darren's dad can kind of be there, watching him, cheering him on, and Darren can know that his dad got to see the big plays and things like that. Or maybe, there's adaptive equipment. If it's about, maybe it's really hot and he needs a cooling vest or shade or some of these other things that might help make it a more comfortable experience for him. Maybe he can sit in the car nearby, whatever it is, coming up with that plan together can help alleviate some of those feelings of disappointment that Darren might have. And then I think it's also really important for Darren and his dad to find activities that they can do together that really are going to work well for both of them. So even if it's not baseball or it's not playing catch, or their indoor activities, doing puzzles together, or their favorite movies they can watch, whatever that looks like for them. So they really have that opportunity to connect one-on-one, even if it's not maybe the most ideal way that Darren would prefer, at least they're still having that opportunity to bond.
We heard from Cindy, whose daughter has said that she feels invisible, like people don't care about her. It's all about her dad because he's the one who's sick. How can parents help make their children feel more seen in these kinds of situations?
Yeah, it's so important for kids with parents with chronic illnesses to make every attempt to not let their parents' illness overshadow the kid. And I know that this can be really tough, but this is a time when kids' bodies and brains are literally growing and developing, and those connections to adults and feeling like they're really seen and heard are so important for their growth and development. But I also know that managing chronic illness can feel really overwhelming for parents, even in the best circumstances. And ensuring that, kids have everything they need, it can feel like a lot. It's an extra element for them to balance. But I have a couple of quick recommendations. So taking time every day to connect with your kid, even if it's just for a few minutes, is going to be really important. Ask them about their day, celebrate those successes, just spend time being kind of normal with them. And then implementing systems. So calendar alerts, this is a really big thing in my family. Helps make sure that my dad doesn't forget about things like birthdays and holidays and big games or presentations. And that by making sure that, to the best of our ability, we've got those things covered, can help kids feel like at least we remembered the big stuff, even if some of the little stuff kind of got lost along the way. And then I think always having conversations with kids about the unpredictability of MS, and whenever possible, coming up with a backup plan will also really help kids feel like, hey, we didn't just miss that activity and then kind of moved on. We missed it. We're really bummed about it. We had a conversation about it, and we're going to come up with a plan to make sure that we can still celebrate together, or we can still do things together. And, despite best intentions and careful planning, there's going to be times when things just don't work out. But really reassuring kids, like, you matter. I really wish these things could have gone differently. That will be really important as well.
Sometimes when a parent has MS, kids may have more chores than their friends, or maybe their extracurricular activities and social life are what get impacted. Children can feel like they're carrying such a heavy load at home that they're not able to pursue some of their own interests. How does something like that affect kids, and what can the parents do to help?
Yeah, I always really caution parents when it comes to asking their kids to take on a lot of these extra tasks, because it can be particularly hard when it starts to impact kids' ability to participate in activities. So, kids with parents who have chronic illnesses are already asked to grow up so much more quickly than their peers. And when we start adding on all of these things onto their plate, it can just really help get kids closer to feeling overwhelmed, and can unfortunately increase the likelihood that they feel resentful or ashamed, or a lot of other kind of feelings we don't really want kids to feel. So if you're a person in this position, I always encourage you to look outside of your family to see if there's ways that you can help. I know sometimes we're in a position that we can hire someone to come in and help us with some of these household chores or lawn yard work, things like that. If you're not in a position to do that, asking friends and family members, community organizations, church groups, anyone who might be able to kind of help. Oftentimes people are more than willing to pitch in if we just give them the opportunity to help. And so I recognize that can be really tough as a parent to ask, your extended network. But I think that it's a trade-off worth making. And I think also recognizing that might mean that there's times that things get dropped. Your house might not be as clean as you wanted. The food might not be as homemade as you wish it was, some of these different things. But at the end of the day, your family feels more balanced, more connected, less overwhelmed, more fulfilled. And I think that's really what we want for kids. And so being able to make that trade-off is really important.
Well, you've shared some great tips with us today, Erin. What would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to remember?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is, again, kind of always providing that age-appropriate, accurate information. It can really help kids to process their parents' illness, really understand it. If you need help with that, the MS Society is great. Use your healthcare professionals if you need help. Really reach out to those resources. My second one, I think, be willing to get vulnerable. Talk to your kids, have conversations frequently with them about how they're doing and how you're feeling. Open the door for them to share their fears, their worries, their hopes for the future. Will really go a long way. And then I think the third, really trying to maintain that consistency for kids. So making sure as much as you can in this world of MS that is already so unpredictable, we don't always know what's going to come next. But the more that we can just really help kids continue to do things that are going to bring them joy, really will help them be more likely to thrive in the long run. And we can really set them up for success in that way.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us, Erin. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 additional questions we've received. Oh, here's a real world scenario. Johnny's mom has MS, and Johnny has a friend whose parent also has MS, but his friend's mom doesn't use a cane, and Johnny wonders why his mom has to. So how should Johnny's mom talk about this with him?
Yeah, I think we're really, again, reminding kids MS is a really unpredictable disease and it impacts everyone differently. it can be really tough when you have a parent that's experiencing something and you're looking around and you're like, I don't see anybody else out there having the same issue. And what's that all about? So I think you can go back to that electrical cord conversation again. You might also, I think this might be a good time to really, remind John, like, hey, it's really great that you have a friend who, even though, their parents' symptoms might be different, you're still in a really similar situation. And so encouraging them to open up and have those conversations amongst one another and share that connection with one another is really powerful. And I know something for me as a kid was really, really powerful to have folks who were in the same boat as me. And so using that opportunity as well to open that door, and if they're willing to have that friendship and connection, could be really great.
Mark told us that his MS has actually progressed over the past few years. He's a single parent, and he's worried that he's starting to rely too much on his son for what seem like basic caregiving tasks. Mark wants to know, when is it time for him to ask for outside help?
Oh boy, yeah. So asking kids to be caregivers, I'm very familiar with the subject. It really can be challenging. I want to go back to that information I shared earlier about kind of kids who are carrying that extra heavy load at home of different things. And I would say, implement some of those same tips. But if you start to recognize particularly, your kids are missing activities, or they start to seem resentful, sad, withdrawn, experiencing symptoms of burnout, these are some kind of different signs that I would look for, that it's definitely time that we be asking for outside help and looking for someone who can help us in that way. But I think the fact that he's even asking this question tells me that, like, he cares a lot about his kid, and it might already be time to be trying to even get ahead of it. And so really kind of setting yourself up for success. And I know it's really tough, but the impact that it will have by not having your son feel so overwhelmed by these tasks that they might be taking on will really set you up to feel more balanced, more connected, less stressed. So I would encourage Mark, probably now is the time to be looking for that outside help.
I want to thank everyone who submitted questions, and thank you for being with us today, Erin.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on multiple sclerosis, please visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll hear about ways to get involved, and you'll find out about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. I'd like to thank Erin for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webinar will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webinar is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to that survey pinned to the comments section, and on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Erin Martin and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.